All right, can everyone hear me okay? Awesome?
Go for it.
Awesome. All right, so welcome to Karen Feeding of Volunteers, or How Can Volunteers? All right, so just a quick word. I'm presenting primarily for projects that have a user base but need more volunteers. Other folks can listen in, but that's primarily who this talk is aimed towards. So about me, hi, my name is Kat Toomajian. This is my first YAPC. This is also my first talk. So I'm known as Zarhui on most of the internet, and my staff account on Dreamwidth is Miss Kat. I work for Dreamwidth Studios LLC, which is an open source blogging platform forked from the LiveJournal codebase in 2008. We have approximately 300,000 lines of code. It's co-owned by Denise Paolucci and Mark Smith. We've got between 50 and 60 active volunteers on various parts of the site, and about 2/3 of those volunteers are women. So my actual job is community and volunteer support. I mostly interface between the users and the developers. I point out bugs. I handle a lot of the documentation. I handhold for new volunteers. And I also manage my community. So that means I'm on the IRC a lot. I answer a lot of questions, and I'm a friendly face for people who are new to the project. As far as experience goes, I've been a nonprofit volunteer for about 15 years with various organizations, and I've been in nonprofit volunteer management for about 5 years, which I've got about 25 to 30 people under me in that. As far as open source projects go, I've been involved with Dreamwidth for about 4 years now. I've been the co-lead of our support team for about 3.5, and then I got hired on in January of this year doing support full-time. So I've also helped with Archive of Our Own and growstuff.org. I've consulted with both of those on their support systems. So why am I giving this talk? There's some general perceptions about open source technology in that it's all male, it's hostile to newcomers, and you need to already have experience, absolutely with programming, hopefully with that language, and preferably with a similar project. There's also a perception of an interview process where the potential volunteer needs to prove themselves before they're worthy to submit to your code base. So let's go ahead and break that down. First of all, half the people on this planet are not male. In fact, in technology, about 10 to 30% of all tech professionals in non-open source technology identify as female. But in open source tech, 1.5 to 5% identify as female. That's a really big disparity, and that's a huge untapped market. So every person at one point or another is a newcomer. Everyone writes their first line of code. Everyone does hello world. You have to remember that, people have to start somewhere, so why not with your project? And being mean to them makes them go away. And that's not what you want. You want them to stay. As far as experience goes, you can't get experience unless somebody lets you get experience. So it's kind of a catch-22 as far as that goes. Also, your project is not interviewing your volunteer. Your volunteer is interviewing your project. So, as Will Wheaton says, don't be a dick. Thank you, Will Wheaton. We appreciate you. So your project is not a special snowflake, at all. There are a lot of projects out there, and your potential volunteers definitely have a lot of options. So they probably don't have any sort of emotional attachment to your project. They just think it looks kind of cool. And there's a lot of different reasons that people might be looking to volunteer. Maybe they want to learn to code. Maybe there's just this one bug that's been driving them nuts for 2.5 years, and they're really sick of it. So they decide to submit a patch and go forward. Just as a fact check, that's how most of our volunteers got started. So they're probably just looking for something interesting to do with their spare time. Also, if they already use your software and you run them off, you're going to lose a user as well as a potential volunteer, which it kind of is a lose-lose situation for you. So when they stop in, they're probably checking out your culture, your environment, the other people that might be involved with your project, whether it's somebody that they know or somebody they've heard of, or pretty much anything else. I mean, it really does vary by person. They could be checking out the accessibility of your technology, what the back-end stuff you use, whether it's Git versus Mercurial or Bugzilla versus 16 bugs, something along those lines. So, step 0, how do I people? So be nice. If your project has, thank you. So if your project has a public IRC channel, try to keep it at least PG-13 or lower. So, Just make it really comfortable for people to be there and don't make them unnecessarily uncomfortable. Excuse me? All right, so community behavior standards should ideally self-enforce, and peer pressure really does work both ways. So there's also combative versus collaborative arguments. So it's okay to argue, but just make sure that you're not running people off when you argue. You want to be able to sit down with them and have a beer at the end of the day. Also, woman is not a four-letter word, and neither is diversity. So writing someone off because of their gender, sexual orientation, race, disability, coding ability, or any one of any number of things, not only is it really, really bad, it also drives people away. Also, try not to use ableist language. Don't make racist jokes and don't make sexist jokes. They're not funny and you will alienate somebody. If someone's offended, the thing you don't want to tell them is, oh, go get a thicker skin or you're being too sensitive. You should just try being less abrasive. Also, be welcoming. It says hi, guys. All right, so being welcoming. You want to lower the entry barrier. If you think it's low already, try making it lower. You really want to make it easy to get started with your project, and we're going to talk more about that in just a minute here. So the catchphrase of Dreamwidth's IRC channel is, beware, you will be welcomed. We have a standard set of welcoming URLs designed to give a crash course in the culture, in the project, and how to do like the really basic stuff like submit bugs and how to use Git and all that good kind of stuff. Our welcoming URLs include links to our wiki, our Bugzilla, as well as our quotes database, our common glossary, our common terminology glossary or jargon page, as well as our GitHub repository. There we go. As an aside, it's also really important to document your culture as well as your code. If you document your culture, it makes it a lot easier for people to break into your project. And if you make it easier to break in, you get more developers, and that means less work for you in the long run. So that's definitely a positive. And you want to make sure that new people are able to code for you. So you want to have really clear steps for how they can get involved. That really lowers the barrier to entry. So Dreamwidth has two communities, one called Dreamwidth Dev and one called Dreamwidth Dev Training. So Dreamwidth Dev is mostly for our senior people to kind of keep people posted on what we're doing, what's new with the process. And Dreamwidth Dev Training is specifically designed for people who are brand new to be able to go and ask questions. The really basic stuff like, how do I submit a pull request? Things that they might not know if they've never worked with a project before. We also have our wiki, IRC, Bugzilla, which allows them to see what's available to fix. How-to guides for the really simple stuff are really, really important. Again, it lowers the barrier to entry, makes it really easy for people to get started with your project. It also is really helpful to have a contact person or people available. It gives people a job to do, and if you have a job, you can say, this is my job, this is my responsibility. Not only does it, again, lower the barrier to entry, but it also creates a sense of involvement and responsibility in your community. People who are responsible are going to stick around. If they feel like they have a job, they're going to stick around. And you want them to stick around because that means there's less work for you. Mentoring is definitely your friend. You want to make sure that there's a way for people to get started, to go from user to developer to leadership. You want to make sure there's a super clear progression as far as that goes, because again, it lowers the barrier to entry if people can have an idea of what to expect next. Let's see here. Again, mentoring is really important. Having somebody who can be that point person for a new person. Like, if somebody comes into our IRC channel and is like, hey guys, I've never done coding before, who do I talk to? People can say, oh, you should go talk to Kat. Kat knows things. Kat has these URLs. And if I'm not around, they can say, infobot, welcome. And literally everything will just pop up right there. It's super awesome. So having mentors available gives people a way to ask questions. So, step 2. What can you do with a newbie dev? Training your developers is a step that a lot of open source projects skip over, but it's something that nonprofit organizations understand innately. So like for Girl Scouts, you start as a Girl Scout, and then as you get a little bit older, you start working with the younger kids, and eventually you end up as a troop leader. It's a pretty clear progression. For open source, the pathway should be user, developer, leadership. So someone uses your software, that person moves into developing your software, and then they eventually take on a leadership role in helping other people develop your software. It's a nice cycle. It helps develop your skills along the way, and the training is actually built into your culture. So developer development is a lifestyle. It takes a lot of effort to nurture a volunteer from newbie to experienced programmer, but this effort is absolutely worthwhile. For example, Dreamwidth brought 14 developers and staff to YAPC this year. We paid for their airfare, their hotel room, their conference fees. This energizes our community, and I guarantee that we are going to see a huge jump in production on Thursday and Friday, as well as for the next couple of months, because it really gets people excited about the project again, especially if it's been, kind of slow or it's end of winter and so on and so forth. So investing in your community, there's a lot of fears that open source projects might have. Well, they don't know enough to be useful, so why should I bother? Or I have more important things to do than to hold this new person's hand. Or if they have a question, they're just going to ask. I mean, I don't need to go and make sure that they can answer or ask the question. Or if they really wanted to learn, they would do it the way I did, carrying bits in an old bucket, uphill, both ways, through a snowstorm on a 56K modem. So don't be this guy. So the rebuttals to this. Knowledge is an acquired thing. You have to learn. Learning happens. You can't just magically appear and know everything. There is literally nothing more important for you to do than to mentor your new developers. Everyone wants to believe that their project is mostly accessible for people to just be able to go and ask questions. But think about this. Do newbies in your IRC channel or on your mailing list ask questions? If you can't think of a time, then maybe you're not as welcoming as you think you are. Also, if somebody asks a question, let me Google that for you, or did you read the documentation? Those are not helpful answers. They're not answers at all, and they're really unwelcoming, and they drive people away. They make people feel stupid, and that's not a way to help get developers. So for most people, it's also really hard to self-start and to learn in a vacuum. So maybe you had to because there wasn't anyone else around to help you, or you didn't have good internet access at home. In this day and age, you are the resource. So make sure you have that responsibility to your community and become that resource. So, newbie developers. Many of our developers started out brand new. It's a thing that Dreamwidth is kind of known for. If you're an experienced developer who doesn't need the mentoring or hand-holding, it's not forced on you or anything, but it's definitely an option that's available if you feel that you need it. So what can a newbie developer do? Let them work on really, really small bugs. There's always those little tiny bugs that are super annoying but might not be important enough to fix, or you don't have time, or, oh, I'll get to it later. Newbie developers, that's kind of a really good thing for them to be able to do. So just go through your bug base, do a cursory review, and if they look pretty easy, like just adding white space or adding something to a drop-down menu, go ahead and mark it or tag it as effort minor or as dev bait for people to come in and entice them to start with your community. Dreamwidth also posts those type of bugs to our training community, which those tend to get jumped on really quickly for people who just want to get started and don't really know where to start. It can be really intimidating to look at, couple thousand bugs and be like, I don't know what I can do. So if you pull them out, it also lowers that barrier to entry. So there's 3 perks to this. Your tiny bugs get fixed without any senior development time getting taken up. You don't have to train any bad habits out of them because you're training them from the ground up. And it also gives your blossoming developer something they can point to and say, look, see that? I did that. That's a thing that I did. And not only can they do that, at least on Dreamwidth, when we do our code tours, other people will come in and say, yeah, you totally did that thing. That is a thing that you just did, and I'm really proud of you. Or I'm really happy that you did that thing. That is the best feeling in the world. And I'm not going to lie, that's totally part of the reason why I started working with Dreamwidth, is because I got that motivation. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in just a second here as well. And that totally makes them go, yes. So, step 3, question mark, question mark, question mark. Every project and every developer has special needs, and that's okay. Look at your project's culture or what you want that culture to be to find out what you need to focus on. So Dreamwidth places a huge emphasis on accessible tech, and we train that into our developers from day one. That's one of the first things that you learn about the Dreamwidth project, is that we want to be accessible. We want to make sure that things are available to everybody. So you don't have to hack it on later or add it on as a an afterthought, like, oh yeah, maybe I should make this accessible. That's something that we do from day one. And we don't back engineer either, which is really helpful. So, be encouraging. Give credit where credit's due. Girl Scouts have merit badges, and Dreamwidth puts your name in a news post. We also do code tours, which highlight the developer who is working on a bug. Even if they're like the really obscure ones that are on the back end, we kind of explain them for our user base to say, yeah, I have no idea what this thing is, but it works now, so that's really awesome. And we also have other volunteers do that, people who might not necessarily be developers. It gets them a little more familiarized with our code base and with our project, which definitely a win-win. Also, bribery can totally be acceptable under certain circumstances. I've been known to bake and send cookies to developers if they fix a bug that's been driving me nuts. My boss knits socks for code, so. Yes, if you code with Dreamwidth, you will get socks, probably. It's part of our culture, and it works well enough for us. Your mileage may vary, but seriously, baking cookies is definitely recommended. Also, be willing to write references for your community who's participating. It's a really great motivator, especially for people who are just getting started in the tech industry, to have a way to be able to say, you know, yes, Mr. Manager, I have coded things before, and here's a reference from the person that I worked with. And then Denise writes some super awesome, like, yeah, they're totally awesome letter, and then you get hired. So more people being employed in the community is also a good thing, because we all like to eat. So, imposter syndrome. We're going to talk about that for just a second here. It's something that you really need to be on the lookout for in your community. Imposter syndrome is the constant feeling that any minute everyone around you will find out that you're faking it. So, when imposter syndrome is the difference between abandoning several months of work on a patch because you're confused about something, but you don't want to ask a question because you feel like you should know the answer, and that people are going to make fun of you if you ask, or just being comfortable asking the question, which would you prefer? I mean, let's not throw away those several months worth of work just because you don't want to ask a question. So make your community available to people to ask questions. Don't ridicule them if they ask questions. Also, provide encouragement and positive reinforcement. Just be aware that that's a thing that can happen. So, be flexible. There's a place for almost everyone in your organization. The only people that there are not room for are the people who are not positive influences. Cheerleaders are important. Community management is extremely important. Creating a welcoming and opening environment is very, very important. Not everyone who's involved with your project is going to be interested in coding, and that's okay. These people can still be valuable contributors to your community. Cheerleaders encourage your developers and show them that their hard work is affecting someone. When we get a resolved fix coming through on IRC, there's pretty much universally a whole lot of cheering when that happens, because, hey, a thing just got done. Yay, let's go us. Can I get a show of hands who actually likes writing documentation? You don't count, you don't count. So people who aren't necessarily developers can totally write documentation for you. Give them something to do, they're going to stick around with your project. Also, end user support is a really great way to get people involved. End user support is a gateway drug to development. So step 4, profit, yay! By mentoring your developers, you help to ensure the long-term survival of your project. People who work on something are more likely to get invested, and if they're invested, they're going to bring their friends. More developers for you, win-win. Nurturing your developers is really the next best thing to having a developer custom built at the developer factory. As I said before, no bad habits can be trained out of them. They're going to learn your product from the ground up, and they're going to learn what you want them to learn, how you want them to learn it. So, let's recap. Be nice, learn how to people. Lower your entry barriers, mentor your developers, project-specific goals, and ensure the long-term survival of your project. In conclusion, how can you do this in your project? Well, you can do them all. You absolutely can. This is totally a thing that you can do. But pick one to start. Probably being nice and welcoming and making your environment more likely to nurture and encourage new developers. Master that one thing, and then move on to the next one. Learning how to newcomers takes time, just like it takes time to learn how to code. So be patient, ask for help when you need it, and when in doubt, consult your reference. So Birthday Hat Hedgehog says, thanks for listening. Thanks. Does anyone have any questions or comments? There's a hedgehog up there, so that's good.
Everything is better with hedgehogs.
It totally is, because they're like little tiny knitting needle factories. I'm going to take my mic off now. Oh, yeah.
I just wanted to say that one thing that I suggested I liked in there was the idea of encouraging people to take sort of low-hanging fruit to begin with.
Yeah, low-hanging fruit's definitely a good idea.
And that's not just a thing for new developers in terms of development, but it's also a good thing. You can term it as a very good thing for experienced developers too, because you can say like, oh, it's not that, you don't have to explicitly say this, but, oh, it's not that we want you to do something easy because we don't trust that you write good code, but rather, we want you to do something easy because the sooner we get you to contribute something, then the sooner we've reeled you into contributing more. And if you do it that way, then it's like, oh, hey, now I've contributed like 3 bugs, now I can pick this huge thing to work on that I'm good enough to do. But, oh, I'm already a contributor, so I know that I can do it, and so I'm more likely to finish it.
Yeah, it's definitely a way to help combat imposter syndrome, for sure.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Jen?
My experience contributing to agreements was that the first, like, 2 or 3 bugs that I submitted were like my dearest children. I was so concerned that they be, accepted and loved and nurtured. And then by the time I got to like my 300, I was like, whatever. It's just another bug. So there's that kind of ramp as well in terms of people's I guess their attachment to their work, so that they're much more susceptible to criticism at the beginning than they are when they're really long.
Yeah, and it's definitely really important that when you get that first or second or third patch from somebody, maybe somebody that you don't even know who hasn't jumped in your IRC channel, but they just submit that pull request on GitHub, that you are super encouraging with that code review. Yeah, this thing is awesome. I love the way that you use that curly bracket. That was like inspired. Just even if it's just something really simple, if it's like a 1-line fix, this is amazing that you did this in 1 line. It's a work of art. It's brilliant. Like, lay it on thick.
Or we've been really wanting someone to fix that. Thank you.
This has been driving me nuts. Thank you for fixing this. Absolutely. Once you get past those first couple bugs and you start to get a feel for the community, that's when you start really getting people hooked. So you want to make sure that those first couple interactions you have are like spot on, super awesome. Yep.
So the rewards at first, I agree, is extremely important.
Absolutely.
I like to reward enthusiasm with responsibility.
The way that about 90% of our project leads kind of got roped into being project leads, I certainly don't know anybody like that, is because they hung around in IRC too much and were just a little bit too enthusiastic, and then they suddenly, hey Kat, you're in charge of support. What? Okay, yeah, let's do it. And then like at that point I totally stepped up and I was in charge of support, well, with me and 2 other super awesome ladies. Hi, Dom and Kemla. And yeah, like giving people responsibility is definitely a way to make them invested in your community and a way to help them stick around. Yeah?
So what you're describing is good for products that are, let's say, end-user products. Right?
Yes. Primarily.
I think, I don't know about the people here, but in general at the conference, most of the people I think writing libraries. So basically the users are developers.
If users are developers and you're writing a library, there's definitely a way to encourage them. Unfortunately, I don't write libraries and I'm not super familiar with that, but Deborah can totally answer your question.
I think like the role of the first commit actually still goes. One of the things that's most frustrating as a developer, as an experienced developer, when I'm committing to another open source project, I'm like, wow, this particular thing has really been bothering me for a while, and I'm going to fix it because, it's not okay if somebody needs it, it's an open source project, and you commit to fix. And what so often happens is, we don't know who you are, we're not going to prioritize looking at your code review, we don't understand why, we're not going to prioritize giving you a code review, we don't understand why you did that fix, we're not going to ask you why. So like, there have been multiple projects where, this has happened for me, and I know this has happened for a lot of other developers I know, where you say, hey, I'd like to I want to fix that one thing in that library, in that, in that platform, in that framework. And if your first commit gets not just rejected for a good reason, but just ignored, or rejected because we don't understand you, please go away, then you're never going to commit to that project again. If your first commit gets accepted, the odds are really high that like within a couple of years you're going to end up being like a major committer to the project, because that's just how developers work. So when you see a pull request or whatever, depending on commit request, depending on your system, from a brand new developer, if you've never seen before, you don't know who they are, they don't hang out in your IRC channel or on your mailing list, I think it's really important to say, hey, I wonder who that person is. Let's take a look at this. Let's see if that's someone we should reach out to. Maybe they want to be a developer, a major developer on our product.
And if it doesn't fit to your formatting guides or it's not exactly what you're looking for, instead of just rejecting it whole cloth or just ignoring it or writing it off or just pretending that you never, oh, I don't know what that thing is, I've never seen that before, you can, respond back to them and be like, thank you so much for your interest in my project. I really appreciate it. And here's just for your next patch, we'd really like to see this, this, and this. These are the changes that I've had to make. I've had to tweak it just a little bit to fit our form. The next time you submit a patch, just assume that they're going to submit again. Just, hey, just try to follow these guidelines. That'd be super awesome. If you need any help, feel free to come and ask me, or go ask this guy over here that I know who's really good at helping, that sort of thing. Robbie?
Yeah, I find that as a project lead, sometimes I wanted to fix that bug my way, but I've got to be prepared to respect somebody else's time that they put in to contribute a patch.
Absolutely. Respecting other people's time for when they fix something the way that they think it should be fixed, even if it's not the way you think it should be fixed, if it's going to work.
You got to check your ego.
Yeah.
Actually, one other thing another thing that just occurred to me is, depending on what your main way of communicating is, like you have a mailing list, for instance, if you make sure that every time you get a new contribution, like the welcome, the congratulations, you just had a first time submit. If someone looks at your mailing list and one of the things you have is, like first time patch from so and so, welcome, then that would make a huge difference for somebody who's looking and trying to decide if they want to contribute or not. Like if they say, oh hey, the first time I get a patch contributed, I'll get this welcome to the community, thanks for your first patch email, then that might encourage more people to join in and contribute also.
Absolutely. And we are totally out of time, guys, but this has been super awesome. Thank you so much for coming.